Lawn care, landscape, and irrigation. Does that keep you up at night? Do you drive home and say, wow, look at that amazing yard? Probably not. But yet, if you stop for a moment and you have a nice yard, did that happen by accident or did that take work? Do you have a newer property that's in a homeowners association and there are requirements to what the outside appearance of your home looks like? Well, how does that apply to a rental property, and why ask the question pertaining to the lawn care of our property, the landscape on the property, and our irrigation? Well, ultimately, the question comes up when it's neglected. And then whose responsibility is it? For every owner, you look at your expenses on a property and you look for ways to cut expenses. Some expenses are negotiable. Some expenses just may make sense. Putting in sod is incredibly expensive. Putting in irrigation is incredibly expensive. But a healthy lawn that's well taken care of, that has an automatic irrigation system, can be a gorgeous yard. So as we have a rental property, we want to look at long term. What happens if the tenant neglects taking care of the yard? What happens if the tenant neglects the yard and you have a homeowners association? Who is going to have to pay that bill? Who is going to have to make that repair? Regardless of who's responsible, you're probably going to have to write that check, especially when the association gets involved, because they're going to put a timeline on it. Redoing a yard is incredibly expensive. How can we avoid that? For an older home that does not have an irrigation system, oftentimes the yard is very well rooted and very hardy. So irrigation is not as important. But grass still needs water. If you're having trouble with your yard and you don't have an irrigation system, maybe it's a wise investment. If you're in a newer home and it does have an irrigation system there, that's fantastic, it's taken care of. But how do we make sure that it's being taken care of? In the state of Florida, we have 9 to 10 months of hot weather. If somebody leaves the irrigation off in the month of July, how's that yard going to fare? Probably not too well. And what about cutting the yard? Who's responsible for cutting the grass? And is that all that they're responsible for? What about trimming? What about weeding the beds? When it comes to maintenance on a property, we ultimately want to make sure that the tenant understands their responsibilities. Having a conversation, sitting down with the tenants, can we walk them through the irrigation timer? Let's make sure that we start on a good foot with our tenants. But for ourselves, sometimes we're okay taking certain risk. Sometimes we want to make sure we have some security. In most residential communities, you could hire a lawn person that would come out and cut the grass, and you could determine what exactly they're going to be responsible for and their frequency. Is that worth the investment? It could be. If the tenant is responsible for the lawn, does the tenant know what exactly they're responsible for? Do they know the property has an irrigation system, or if they may need to water it themselves? These are all avoidable problems from the beginning as long as we understand the process. And then if we add a layer of protection, in Florida, a lawn chemical company can be very common. Maybe we have them come out every 6 to 8 weeks, at least seeing the property, maybe a little more frequently, because they're looking at the grass specifically. If we have someone that we hire to cut the grass, to keep up with the beds. They're going to be out on the property every week, maybe every 2 weeks, looking at the yard to see the condition. Sometimes these are necessary protections to make sure that the yard is not neglected. Either way, let's sit down with the tenant, and as we introduce them to the property, no matter where they have rented in the past, how young or old they may be, let's give our tenants an introduction to the property they're going to be living in. Let's educate them on how we take care of a yard in Florida, how the irrigation needs to be handled, how frequent the lawn needs to be cut. That way, we're on the same page from the beginning, and we can avoid problems that are unnecessary. Have you had trouble in the past? Do you have a property you're thinking about renting? Let's talk about your property. Let's talk about the things we can do to prepare in advance to avoid unnecessary problems and make your investment a good investment, a solid investment, and one that doesn't keep you up at night wondering about what may or may not happen. My name is Baron McWright with Northeast Florida Realty. I look forward to talking to you very soon.